Some places are better left untouched, but Caleb Holt never listened to warnings. Not until the snow turned red. In the fall of 1847, Caleb Holt led his group of 12 through the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, chasing a dream of a new life. At 40, he was a man of grit and stubborn hope, his face weathered by years of guiding wagon trains west. His wife, Sarah, walked beside him, her eyes bright despite the long road. Jonah, his best friend since boyhood, cracked jokes to keep the group's spirits up. The others, families, dreamers, and drifters, followed, their wagons creaking under the weight of tools and hope. They'd heard of a valley, untouched and fertile, hidden deep in the Rockies. Caleb swore it was their chance to start over. The valley was everything he'd promised. It stretched wide and green, cradled by snow-capped peaks and thick pine forests. A clear stream cut through the grass, sparkling under the October sun. But the air was sharp, colder than it should have been, and the wind carried a low hum that made the horses twitch. Caleb brushed it off. "This is it," he said, his voice booming as he clapped Jonah on the shoulder. "Our new home." The group set to work, their laughter echoing as they pitched tents and unloaded supplies. Sarah organized the women, sorting pots and blankets, while Jonah led the men to chop wood for cabins. By dusk, a small camp took shape, smoke curling from a fire. Caleb stood at the edge, scanning the valley. It was perfect, too perfect maybe. He shook the thought away. He'd seen worse than cold winds in his years on the trail. That's when he saw it, a footprint in the snow, just beyond the camp. It was massive, twice the size of a man's, with deep claw marks at the toes. Caleb knelt, his fingers tracing the edges. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something else. His gut twisted, but he kept his face steady. No need to spook the group on their first day. He covered the print with snow, glancing at the darkening forest. The trees stood silent, but he felt eyes on him, heavy and cold. Night fell, and the group gathered around the fire, sharing stories of the lives they'd left behind. Sarah leaned against Caleb, her hand warm in his. "This place feels different," she whispered, her eyes on the flames. "Like it's watching us." Caleb squeezed her hand, forcing a smile. "Just the wind, love. We'll make it ours." But the wind wasn't just wind. As the fire died, a sound cut through the night, a low, guttural growl, rolling down from the mountains. The horses whinnied, tugging at their ropes. Jonah grabbed his rifle, his grin gone. What the hell was that? He muttered, peering into the dark. The group froze, their faces pale in the firelight. Caleb stood, his hand on the knife at his belt. "Stay calm," he said, his voice firm. "Probably just a mountain lion." Eliza, a young woman with a Bible clutched to her chest, shook her head. "That wasn't no lion," she said, her voice trembling. "The natives warned us. They call this place the land of the white shadow." Caleb shot her a look. "Enough of that talk. We're here now, and we're staying." But Sarah's grip tightened on his arm, and he knew she'd heard the stories too. Tales of a creature, half man, half beast, that hunted in the snow. The growl came again, closer, rattling the air. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. Caleb scanned the tree line, his heart pounding. Nothing moved, but the darkness felt alive, pressing in from all sides. Everyone inside the tents. He ordered, grabbing a torch. Jonah followed, rifle ready, as they checked the camp's perimeter. The horses were calm now, but the air was thick, like a storm was brewing. Caleb stopped at the spot where he'd covered the footprint. The snow was undisturbed, but nearby he saw something new. A broken branch, high on a tree, too high for a man to reach. His torchlight caught a glint of something wet on the bark. Blood? He didn't say it out loud. Jonah noticed too, his face grim. "We need to watch our backs," he said, low enough for only Caleb to hear. As they returned to the fire, Caleb's mind raced. He'd led these people here, promised them a future. But the valley wasn't empty. Something was out there, and it wasn't welcoming them. He glanced at Sarah, her face tight with worry, and made a silent vow. Whatever this thing was, he'd protect them, even if it meant facing the white shadow itself. The morning after the growl shook the camp, The valley felt colder, like the mountains were holding their breath. Caleb woke before dawn, his sleep broken by dreams of red eyes in the snow. Sarah stirred beside him, her face tight with worry, but she didn't speak. The fire was down to embers, and the camp was quiet, save for the nervous snorts of the horses. Caleb grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, the frost crunching under his boots. The footprint he'd covered was gone, buried under fresh snow. But the broken branch and its hint of blood gnawed at him. Something was out there, and he needed answers. Jonah was already up, sharpening his knife by the fire. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he said, his usual grin nowhere in sight. Caleb nodded, glancing at the forest. "We're going hunting. Need meat for the winter, but I also want to know what's stalking us." Jonah didn't argue. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, and the two men headed out, leaving Sarah to keep the camp calm. Eliza watched them go, clutching her Bible, her eyes sharp with fear. "Don't bring the devil back with you," she muttered. Caleb ignored her. He had enough to deal with without her sermons. The snow was deep, slowing their steps as they trekked into the forest. The trees loomed tall, their branches heavy with ice, blocking out the weak morning light. Caleb's breath fogged the air, his rifle heavy in his hands. They followed a game trail, hoping for deer. But the woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustle of small critters. Just the crunch of their boots and the wind's low moan. "This place gives me the creeps," Jonas said, his voice low. Caleb didn't answer. He was focused on the ground, searching for tracks. They found him an hour in, near a frozen stream. Another footprint, just like the one by the camp. Huge, clawed, and deep, like it belonged to something that weighed a ton. Caleb knelt, his fingers brushing the edges. "This ain't no bear," he said, his gut twisting. Jonah pointed to a trail of prints leading deeper into the woods. "Whatever it is, it's moving fast." Nearby, they spotted a deer carcass, its body torn open, ribs exposed like broken fingers. Claw marks raked the flesh, too wide for any animal Caleb knew. "Jesus," Jonah whispered, gripping his rifle tighter. "What could do this?" The trail led to a rocky outcrop where the snow thinned, revealing a dark opening in the hillside, a cave. Caleb's heart kicked up a notch. "That's where it's coming from," he said, nodding toward the entrance. Jonah hesitated, his face pale. "You sure about this, Caleb? Could be a trap." But Caleb was already moving, his torch crackling as he lit it. "We need to know what we're up against. You with me?" Jonah cursed under his breath, but followed, his rifle ready. The cave was narrow, the air damp and heavy, smelling of earth and something sour, like old blood. Caleb's torch cast flickering shadows on the walls, revealing rough stone carved with strange symbols, spirals and jagged lines, like nothing he'd seen before. "Native work?" Jonah asked, his voice echoing. Caleb shook his head. "Older. Doesn't feel right." The symbols seemed to pulse in the firelight, making his skin crawl. He pushed deeper, the cave widening into a small chamber. There they found it, a stone slab like an altar covered in dark stains. Bones, human by the look of them, were scattered around it, some cracked open, others scratched with those same symbols. Caleb's stomach churned. "This ain't no hunting ground," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jonah picked up a shard of bone, his hands shaking. "People died here, Caleb. A lot of them." The air grew colder, and a faint growl rumbled from deeper in the cave, low and menacing. Caleb grabbed Jonah's arm. "We're leaving. Now." They backed out, torches shaking, the growl following them like a living thing. Outside, the snow was falling harder, a storm rolling in. As they hurried back to camp, Caleb spotted something new, a strip of deer hide tied to a tree, flapping in the wind. Carved into it was one of the symbols from the cave, sharp and deliberate. "It's a message," Jonas said, his voice tight. "It knows we were here." The camp came into view, but the mood was sour. Sarah met them at the edge, her face pale. "You were gone too long," she said, hugging Caleb. He didn't tell her about the cave, not yet. The group was already on edge, Eliza muttering prayers by the fire. But as night fell, the storm hit, snow piling high around the tents. And then it came again, that growl, closer now, circling the camp. Caleb gripped his rifle, standing guard as the wind howled. The white shadow was out there, and it wasn't just watching anymore. It was hunting. The storm hit the valley like a hammer, snow piling high and wind screaming through the pines. Caleb stood guard outside the camp, his rifle frozen in his hands. The growl from the night before still echoing in his mind. The strip of deer hide with its carved symbol hung heavy in his thoughts, a warning he couldn't shake. The camp was a cluster of tents and half-built cabins, barely holding against the blizzard. Inside, the group huddled around a fire, their faces drawn and silent. Sarah's eyes met his through the tent flap, full of questions he didn't want to answer. Not yet. Morning brought no relief. The snow was knee-deep, the sky a dull gray that promised more. Caleb and Jonah checked the horses, finding them spooked, their ropes frayed like something had tugged at them. "We need to talk about that cave," Jonas said, his voice low. Caleb nodded, but kept his mouth shut. The bones, the altar, the growl, they were real and they were trouble. But scaring the group now would only make things worse. That's when Eliza started shouting. "Thomas is gone," she cried, bursting from her tent. Thomas, a quiet farmer with a limp, had gone to fetch firewood at dusk and never came back. Caleb sunk. He grabbed his torch and rifle, calling for Jonah and two others, Henry and Samuel, to search. Sarah wanted to come, but he shook his head. "Stay here. Keep everyone calm." Her eyes burned with worry, but she nodded, pulling Eliza close. The search party moved fast, their torches hissing in the snow. They found Thomas's trail near the woodpile, his boot prints clear at first, then jumbled, like he'd been running. A few yards out, the prints stopped at a patch of blood, bright red against the white. Caleb's heart pounded. "Spread out," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. Jonah found Thomas's shoe, torn and empty, half buried in a drift. Next to it was another footprint, massive, clawed, just like the ones by the stream. "It's here," Jonah whispered, his rifle shaking. The trail led into the forest, where the trees closed in like a trap. Caleb's torch caught more blood, smeared across a trunk, too high for a man to reach. Samuel, a burly blacksmith, cursed under his breath. "What kind of animal does this?" he said. Caleb didn't answer. He knew it wasn't an animal. The wind howled, carrying that low growl again, closer now, vibrating in their bones. Henry, a young kid barely 20, froze. "We gotta go back," he stammered. But Caleb pushed forward, his torch shaking. "We don't leave our own." They didn't find Thomas. The trail ended at a clearing. The snow churned like a fight had happened. In the center was a single bone, human, snapped clean in half. Caleb's stomach turned. "He's gone," he said, his voice flat. Jonah grabbed his arm. "We can't stay out here, Caleb. It's watching us." The growl came again, from the trees this time, and Caleb felt eyes on him, cold, heavy, like a predator sizing up its prey. Back at camp, the group was a mess. Eliza sobbed, clutching her Bible, muttering about curses. Sarah was pale, but steady, organizing the women to reinforce the tents. Caleb called everyone together, his voice cutting through the panic. "We're building a fence. Logs, branches, anything we can use. No one goes out alone." He didn't mention the bone or the growl. They were scared enough. Sarah pulled him aside, her hands trembling. "What did you find out there?" she asked. Caleb hesitated, then handed her a small book he'd found in Thomas's tent, a tattered journal, its pages filled with sketches of the valley and notes about the white shadow. One page described a creature, tall and covered in white fur, with eyes like burning coals. "The natives say it guards the land," Thomas had written. "It takes those who trespass." Sarah's face hardened. "You knew this place was dangerous, didn't you?" Caleb looked away, guilt twisting in his chest. "I thought we could handle it." That night, the storm raged harder, the wind screaming like a living thing. Caleb and Jonah took first watch, their torches barely cutting through the blizzard. The fence was up, but it felt flimsy, like it wouldn't stop whatever was out there. Then, just past midnight, Caleb saw it. A shape, massive and white, standing at the edge of the forest. It was taller than any man, its fur blending with the snow, its eyes glowing red through the storm. Caleb's breath caught, his rifle raised, but before he could shout, it was gone, melting into the dark. Jonah grabbed his arm, his face white. "You saw that, right?" Caleb nodded, his mouth dry. "We need to check that cave again," he said, his voice low. "Whatever that thing is, it's not just hunting. It's playing with us." The white shadow was real, and it wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The valley was a frozen prison now, the storm locking Caleb's group in with no way out. Thomas's death hung over the camp like a curse. His empty shoe and that snapped bone burned into everyone's minds. The fence they'd built felt like a cruel joke, too flimsy to stop the thing Caleb had seen in the snow, tall, white, with eyes like hellfire. The white shadow. He couldn't shake the image, and neither could Jonah, who hadn't cracked a joke since. Sarah kept the group together, her voice steady. But Caleb saw the fear in her eyes. They needed answers, and the cave was the only place to find them. "We're going back," Caleb said at dawn, his breath fogging in the cold. The camp was quiet. The group huddled in their tents, Eliza's prayers drifting like a ghost. Jonah, Henry, and Samuel nodded, grabbing rifles and torches. Sarah grabbed Caleb's arm, her grip tight. "You saw it out there, didn't you?" she whispered. Caleb met her eyes, hating the lie he was about to tell. "Just a shadow, Sarah. We'll be fine." She didn't believe him, but she let go, her face hard. "Come back to me," she said. He nodded, but the weight of Thomas's loss made the promise feel hollow. The trek to the cave was brutal, the snow up to their thighs, the wind cutting through their coats. The forest was a maze of white, every tree hiding a threat. Caleb led, his rifle ready, the memory of the carved deer hide pushing him forward. Jonah stayed close, his eyes darting to every shadow. "This thing's playing with us," he muttered, like a cat with a mouse. Henry, barely keeping up, clutched his torch like a lifeline. Samuel, the blacksmith, was silent, his axe slung over his shoulder. They all felt it. The valley wasn't theirs. It belonged to something else. The cave loomed ahead, its mouth black against the snow. Caleb lit his torch, the flame hissing as it caught. "Stay sharp," he said, stepping inside. The air was damp, heavy with that sour, bloody smell. The symbols on the walls glowed in the firelight. Spirals and jagged lines that seemed to twist when he looked too long. Jonah traced one with his finger, his face pale. "This ain't native," he said. "It's wrong." Caleb didn't argue. The cave felt alive, like it was watching them. They pushed deeper, the passage narrowing until they had to stoop. The symbols grew denser, covering every inch of stone. The cave opened into a chamber, and Caleb's torch revealed the truth. A stone altar stood in the center, stained black with old blood. Human skulls lined the walls, their empty sockets staring. Bones littered the floor, some fresh enough to glisten. In the middle of the altar was a carving, a figure, tall and furred, with red eyes scratched into the stone. "The white shadow," Caleb whispered, his voice shaking. Jonah found a leather-bound book, half buried in the dirt. Its pages were brittle, written in a language none of them knew, but the drawings were clear. Men kneeling before the altar, offering blood to summon the creature. "It's a ritual," Jonah said, his voice barely audible. "They called it here to protect the valley, but it turned on them." Samuel snorted, gripping his axe. "Superstition. It's just a beast." But Henry backed toward the exit, his torch shaking. "We shouldn't be here," he stammered. "This place is cursed." Before Caleb could answer, a growl shook the chamber, deep and guttural, coming from deeper in the cave. The air turned ice cold, and the torches flickered like they might die. "Move!" Caleb shouted, shoving Henry toward the exit. They ran, boots slipping on the stone, the growl chasing them like a living thing. Samuel lagged behind, his axe clanging against the walls. "Keep up," Jonah yelled, but the passage was too narrow, the dark too thick. They burst into the snow, gasping, but Samuel didn't make it. Caleb spun, torch raised, and saw the cave's mouth empty. "Samuel!" he shouted, his voice echoing. No answer. Jonah grabbed his arm. He's gone, Caleb. We gotta go. But Caleb couldn't leave another man behind. He stepped back toward the cave, rifle ready, when the growl came again, right behind them. They turned, and there it was, Samuel's body, hanging from a tree, his eyes gone, his chest torn open. Blood dripped into the snow, steaming in the cold. Henry screamed, dropping his torch. Jonah cursed, raising his rifle. But Caleb just stared, his heart pounding. The tree was too high, the wounds too precise. The white shadow had done this, and it had done it fast. Back to camp, Caleb said, his voice flat. They ran, the storm swallowing their tracks, the growl fading but never gone. When they reached the camp, Sarah was waiting, her face pale. Where's Samuel? She asked. Caleb couldn't meet her eyes. Dead, he said, and the word felt like a blade. The group gathered, Eliza's prayers louder now, accusing. You led us to hell, she spat, pointing at Caleb. He didn't argue. The cave had shown him the truth. The white shadow wasn't just a beast. It was a curse, and they'd walked right into it. The valley was a frozen hell now, the storm burying the camp in snow so deep it swallowed the tents. Caleb stood by the fire, his hands numb. Samuel's eyeless face burned into his mind. The cave had shown him the truth. The white shadow wasn't just a beast, but a curse tied to blood and bone. 9 of them were left, huddled in the cold, their fence creaking under the wind's assault. Sarah moved among the group, passing out what little food remained, but her eyes kept finding Caleb, sharp with questions he couldn't answer. The air was thick with fear, and the growl from the forest never seemed to stop. Morning brought no warmth, just a gray sky and more snow. The horses were starving, their ribs showing, and the group supplies were down to a few sacks of flour and dried meat. We're trapped, Jonas said, his voice low as he sharpened his knife. Caleb nodded, staring at the mountains. The passes were blocked, the valley a cage. We hold out, he said. Build up the fence, ration the food. Spring will come. But even he didn't believe it. The white shadow was out there, and it wasn't waiting for spring. Eliza was worse than ever, her prayers a constant drone. God sees your sins, Caleb, she spat, clutching her Bible. You brought us to this devil's land. Henry, still shaken from the cave, nodded, his eyes darting to the trees. Sarah stepped in, her voice firm. Enough, Eliza. We're all scared, but fighting won't help. Caleb shot her a grateful look, but the doubt in her eyes cut deeper than Eliza's words. She'd read Thomas's journal, seen the sketches of the white shadow. She knew Caleb was holding something back. That night, the storm raged harder, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. Caleb and Jonah took watch, their torches barely alive in the blizzard. Mary, a quiet widow who'd kept to herself, volunteered to check the horses. They're all we got left, she said, pulling her coat tight. Caleb nodded, distracted by the growl, circling the camp, closer than ever. He should have stopped her, should have known better, but he didn't. An hour later, a scream tore through the night. Mary's, raw and desperate, cut off like a snapped thread. Caleb bolted toward the sound, Jonah on his heels, their rifles raised. The fence was shattered, logs splintered like kindling. Mary was gone, her scarf caught on a jagged stump, flapping in the wind. Blood stained the snow, leading into the forest, alongside those massive clawed footprints. It took her, Jonah whispered, his face white. Caleb's heart pounded, guilt clawing at him. We can't follow, he said, hating the words. Not in this storm. The group gathered, their faces pale in the firelight. Eliza screamed, We're next. It's coming for us all. Henry grabbed his rifle, shouting about running for the mountains. But Sarah shut him down. We stick together, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Caleb tried to speak, to rally them, but the words stuck in his throat. Mary's scream echoed in his head, joining Thomas's and Samuel's. He'd promised to protect them, and he was failing. Sarah pulled him aside, her hands shaking. You know more than you're saying, she said, her voice low. Those symbols in the cave, I saw one like them on your knife. Caleb, what aren't you telling me? Caleb's stomach dropped. The knife was old. A gift from a trapper years ago, carved with a spiral he'd never questioned. He wanted to tell her everything about the valley, the stories he'd heard as a young man. But the truth felt too heavy. "I don't know," he lied, looking away. "I swear, Sarah, I'm trying to keep us alive." She stepped back, hurt flashing in her eyes. "You'd better," she said and walked away. The group worked through the night, rebuilding the fence with what little wood they had. Jonah stayed close to Caleb, his rifle never leaving his hands. "We're sitting ducks," he said, his voice grim. "That thing's not just hunting, it's picking us off one by one." Caleb nodded, his mind racing. Thomas's journal mentioned a ritual, a way to summon the white shadow. Maybe there was a way to stop it. But the cave was too far, the storm too fierce. And deep down, Caleb felt the truth. The valley didn't want them to leave. As dawn broke, gray and lifeless, Caleb found something new by the fence. A piece of Mary's coat, tied to a stake, soaked in blood. Carved into the wood was that same spiral symbol, fresh and deep. The white shadow wasn't just killing them. It was sending a message. And Caleb knew, standing in the snow with his wife's trust slipping away, that the worst was yet to come. The camp was a graveyard of hope, the snow piling higher, the fence a broken skeleton under the storm's weight. Caleb stood watch, his rifle frozen to his gloves. Mary's bloodied coat and that carved spiral burned into his mind. The white shadow was no longer a shadow. It was a hunter, and they were prey. 8 of them left, their faces hollow with hunger and fear. Sarah hadn't spoken to him since their fight, her trust fraying like the ropes holding the tents. Eliza's prayers were a constant hum, grating on everyone's nerves. Jonah was the only one still fighting, his rifle always ready, but even he looked haunted. The valley wanted them dead, and it was winning. Night fell, black and merciless, the storm screaming like a banshee. Caleb and Jonah patrolled the fence, their torches spitting in the wind. "We can't stay here," Jonah said, his voice low. "That thing's coming for us, Caleb. You know it." Caleb nodded, his jaw tight. Thomas's journal mentioned a pass through the mountains, a way out, but the snow had buried it. Their only chance was to hold out or fight. He didn't know which scared him more. The attack came without warning. A roar shook the camp, louder than thunder, and the fence exploded inward, logs flying like matchsticks. Caleb spun, rifle raised, as the white shadow charged from the dark. It was massive, over 8 feet tall, its white fur blending with the blizzard, its red eyes glowing like coals. Claws like knives gleamed in the torchlight, and its breath steamed in the cold. "Run!" Caleb screamed, firing a shot that echoed uselessly. The creature didn't flinch, its roar drowning out the storm. The group scattered, tents collapsing as they grabbed what they could. Sarah pulled Eliza to her feet, shouting for Henry and the others. Caleb fired again, aiming for the eyes, but the white shadow moved too fast, smashing through the fire pit in a shower of sparks. Jonah swung his rifle like a club, yelling, "Get to the woods." Caleb grabbed Sarah's hand, dragging her toward the trees, the group stumbling behind. The creature's claws raked the ground where they'd stood, missing them by inches. They ran blind, the blizzard swallowing their tracks, the white shadows roar chasing them. Caleb's lungs burned, his boots sinking in the snow. Sarah clung to his arm, Eliza sobbing as Henry half-carried her. The others, Lydia, William, and Rose, followed, their faces white with terror. "Keep moving," Caleb shouted, his torch flickering. The forest was a maze, but he remembered a cabin, half-ruined, a mile from camp. He'd seen it while hunting. If they could reach it, they might survive the night. The cabin appeared through the snow, its walls sagging, windows dark. Caleb kicked the door open, ushering the group inside. The air was musty, the floor littered with broken furniture, but it was shelter. Jonah barred the door with a beam, his hands shaking. "That thing's still out there," he said, peering through a crack. Caleb nodded, checking the group. 8 of them, battered but alive. For now. Sarah found a map, crumpled in a corner, its edges brittle. It showed the valley, with a pass marked in faded ink, the way out. "This could save us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. But Caleb saw the problem. The pass was blocked by an avalanche. The snow too deep to cross. "We'll find a way," he said, more to himself than her. Eliza, kneeling by a broken chair, muttered, "No way out. Only death." Caleb ignored her, but her words hit hard. The white shadow's growl rattled the cabin, close and hungry. The walls shook as something massive slammed against the door. Jonah fired through a crack, the shot swallowed by the storm. "It ain't stopping," he yelled. Caleb grabbed an axe from the floor, his heart pounding. "We fight or we die," he said, looking at Sarah. She nodded, gripping a knife, her face fierce. Jonah took charge, climbing to a loft to get a better shot. "I'll hold off," he shouted, swinging his axe. But the white shadow was faster. The roof caved in, snow, and went crashing down, and the creature's claws tore through. Jonah swung, his axe biting into the beast's arm, but it roared and grabbed him, its strength unnatural. Caleb screamed, "Jonah!" as the white shadow ripped his friend apart, blood spraying the snow. Jonah's body hit the floor, lifeless, his axe still in hand. "Go!" Caleb yelled, shoving the group toward a back window. They climbed out, running into the storm, the cabin collapsing behind them. Sarah clung to Caleb, tears freezing on her cheeks. "He's gone," she whispered, but there was no time to grieve. The white shadow's roar followed them, its red eyes cutting through the blizzard. Caleb led them deeper into the forest, the map clutched in his hand, but the truth was clear. The valley wasn't letting them go, and the white shadow was far from done. The forest was a frozen nightmare, the blizzard swallowing every sound except the white shadow's roar. Caleb led the 7 survivors through the snow, their breaths ragged, Jonah's blood still fresh in their minds. The cabin's collapse was a death knell, its ruins buried behind them. Sarah clung to the map, her hands trembling, her eyes red from tears. Eliza muttered prayers, her Bible soaked and useless. Henry, Lydia, William, and Rose stumbled along, their faces blank with shock. The white shadow was out there, its red eyes cutting through the storm, and Caleb knew running wasn't enough. Not anymore. They stopped in a clearing, the trees offering little shelter. Caleb's legs burned, his rifle heavy in his hands. The map showed a narrow gorge nearby, a possible way out, but the snow was too deep, the path too treacherous. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice hoarse. Sarah grabbed his arm, her face fierce. "No more lies, Caleb. You know what that thing is. Tell us." The group turned, their eyes boring into him, fear and anger mixing. Eliza stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He's cursed us. He brought the devil here." Caleb's stomach twisted. He'd carried the secret too long, and it was killing them. "All right," he said, his voice low. "You want the truth? I'll give it to you." He took a breath, the cold burning his lungs. 20 years ago, I came to this valley with a group of trappers. We heard stories about the White Shadow, a creature that could make us rich if we caught it. A native guide showed us the cave, the altar. He said a ritual, blood and bone, could summon it. We were young, stupid. We did it. Poured our blood on that stone. And it came. Sarah's eyes widened, hurt flashing across her face. "You knew," she whispered. Caleb nodded, guilt choking him. "It killed everyone but me. I ran, swore I'd never come back. But I thought I could make it right, build a life here for us. I was wrong." Eliza screamed, lunging at him, her nails clawing his face. "You damned us!" She shrieked, swinging her Bible like a weapon. Henry pulled her back, but the group was unraveling, their trust in Caleb gone. Before Caleb could speak, a growl shook the clearing, deep and hungry. The white shadow was close, its stench, rotting meat and snow, filling the air. "Move!" Caleb shouted, shoving the group toward the gorge. They ran, tripping over roots, the storm blinding them. The creature's claws scraped the trees, its red eyes glowing through the snow. Sarah clutched the map, shouting directions, but the gorge was narrow, the walls steep and slick with ice. The white shadow struck, a blur of white fur and claws. It slammed into William, a quiet carpenter, dragging him into the dark. His scream was cut short, blood spraying the snow. Lydia shrieked, collapsing, as Rose tried to pull her up. Caleb fired his rifle, the shot useless against the beast's speed. "Keep going," he yelled, grabbing Lydia's arm. The gorge was their only chance, but the creature was hurting them, playing with its prey. Eliza broke, her fear turning to madness. "This is God's wrath," she screamed, turning on Caleb. She swung a branch, catching him in the chest, knocking him down. "You're the devil's servant." Sarah tackled her, pinning her to the snow. "Stop it, Eliza. We need him." But Eliza thrashed, her eyes wild, until Henry tied her hands with a rope. "She's lost it," he muttered, his voice shaking. The gorge loomed ahead, a narrow crack in the mountain, barely wide enough for one person. Caleb led the way, his torch flickering, the white shadows growl echoing behind them. The walls closed in, the air cold and tight. Sarah stayed close, her knife ready, but her silence cut deeper than any blade. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered, but she didn't answer. The group, now 6, squeezed through, their breaths loud in the dark. Inside, the gorge widened slightly, revealing a frozen stream and a faint glow ahead. Daylight, maybe, or a trick of the storm. Caleb's heart lifted, but the white shadow's roar shattered the hope. It was in the gorge, its claws scraping the stone, its eyes burning red. "We can't outrun it," Henry said, his voice breaking. Caleb gripped his rifle, the truth heavy in his chest. He'd brought this curse, and he'd have to end it. But how? The map showed no answers, only the pass, blocked and useless. As they pushed deeper, Caleb spotted something carved into the gorge wall, a spiral, like the ones in the cave, fresh and deep. The white shadow wasn't just hunting them. It was marking its territory, claiming their lives. And Caleb knew, with Sarah's trust broken and the group falling apart, that the creature was only getting started. The gorge was a frozen tomb, its stone walls closing in like a trap. Caleb led the 6 survivors through the narrow pass, their torches flickering, the white shadows growl echoing behind them. Sarah clutched the map, her face set with determination despite the rift between them. Eliza, hands bound, stumbled along, her prayers now silent mutters. Henry, Lydia, and Rose followed, their eyes wide with terror, the memory of William's screams still raw. The spiral symbol carved into the wall burned in Caleb's mind, a mark of the curse he'd unleashed 20 years ago. The white shadow wasn't just hunting them, it was claiming them. The air grew colder, the growl louder, vibrating through the stone. Caleb's rifle felt useless, its bullets no match for the creature's strength. The map showed a pass ahead, a slim chance at freedom, but the gorge was a choke point, and the white shadow knew it. "Keep moving," Caleb said, his voice rough. Sarah glanced at him, her eyes hard but steady. "We're with you," she said, and those words, small as they were, gave him strength. He'd lost her trust, but not her fight. The gorge widened into a small clearing, the snow deep and treacherous. Caleb spotted a glint in the drifts, rusted cans half buried, dynamite, left by miners or trappers, maybe. His heart raced. "Grab those," he told Henry, who scrambled to collect them, his hands shaking. "We can blast our way out," Caleb said, checking the fuses. They were old, brittle, but they might work. If they could collapse the gorge, they could trap the white shadow, or at least slow it down. Before they could plan, the creature struck. A roar shook the clearing, and the white shadow charged from the dark, its white fur a blur, its red eyes blazing. Claws like daggers slashed through the air, missing Rose by inches. Caleb fired, the shot ringing in his ears. But the beast didn't flinch. It lunged at Lydia, who screamed, tripping in the snow. Sarah yanked her up, swinging her knife, but the creature's arm swatted her back, sending her sprawling. "Get to the pass," Caleb shouted, grabbing a stick of dynamite. He lit the fuse, the spark hissing, and hurled it at the white shadow. The explosion rocked the clearing, snow and rock flying. But the creature vanished into the storm, unharmed. Its growl came again, closer, and Caleb felt a voice. Not a sound, but a pressure in his mind. "You cannot run." It was the same voice from his youth, the one that haunted him after the ritual. The white shadow wasn't just a beast. It was a force, eternal and cruel. Henry lit another stick, tossing it into the gorge's mouth. But the blast only angered the creature. It charged again, its claws tearing into Rose, who screamed as it dragged her into the dark. Her cries faded, leaving only blood in the snow. "No!" Lydia wailed, collapsing. Caleb pulled her up, his own grief buried under the need to survive. "We move, or we die," he yelled, shoving the group forward. The pass was close, a narrow crack in the mountain, but the white shadow blocked their path, its massive form filling the clearing. Caleb knew they wouldn't outrun it. Not all of them. He turned to Sarah, his voice breaking. "Take them through. I'll hold it off." Her eyes widened, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Caleb, no." He cut her off, pressing the last dynamite sticks into her hands. "You're stronger than me. Get them out." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, her face fierce. She led Henry, Lydia, and Eliza toward the pass, their torches fading into the storm. Caleb faced the white shadow, his rifle empty, an axe in his hands. "You want me?" He roared, his voice raw. "Come get me." The creature charged, its claws gleaming, and Caleb swung, the blade biting into its arm. It roared, knocking him to the ground, pain exploding in his chest. He crawled to the dynamite cans, lighting every fuse he could reach. The white shadow loomed over him, its red eyes burning, its voice in his head. "You are mine." Caleb grinned, blood on his teeth. "Not today," he spat, and threw the cans at the gorge's walls. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave of fire and stone that buried the clearing. The white shadow's roar was cut off as the gorge collapsed, rock sealing the pass, Caleb with it. Sarah stumbled through the pass, Henry and Lydia dragging Eliza behind. The blast's echo faded, leaving only the storm's howl. They emerged into a valley, the snow lighter, the air clearer. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing, the map crumpled in her hands. Caleb was gone, his sacrifice their only chance. The white shadow's growl was silent, but Sarah felt its presence. A shadow in her mind. They were free, but at what cost? Sarah knelt in the snow, the map crumpled in her hands, the echo of the explosion still ringing in her ears. Caleb was gone, buried with a white shadow under tons of rock. The valley beyond the gorge was quiet, the storm fading to a soft flurry, the sky a pale gray. Henry, Lydia, and Eliza stood behind her, their faces hollow, their breaths fogging the air. 4 of them left, out of 12. The cost of freedom was written in blood. Thomas, Samuel, Mary, Jonah, William, Rose, and now Caleb. Sarah's chest ached, but she forced herself to stand. Caleb had given them a chance, and she wouldn't waste it. They stumbled through the snow, the new valley opening into a trade route marked by old wagon ruts. After days of walking, half-starved and frostbitten, they reached a small frontier town. The locals took them in, wrapping them in blankets, feeding them hot stew. Sarah told their story, the valley, the creature, the deaths, but the townsfolk listened with pity, not belief. Starvation plays tricks on the mind, a doctor said, bandaging her hands. No such thing as a white shadow. Henry and Lydia nodded, too broken to argue, but Sarah knew the truth. She'd seen those red eyes, felt the creature's voice in her head. Eliza was the worst off, her mind shattered. She sat in the town's church, clutching a new Bible, whispering about curses and devils. "It's still out there," she told Sarah, her eyes wild. "It'll come for us." Sarah turned away, unable to face the fear in her words. She wanted to believe the white shadow was dead, trapped in the gorge with Caleb. But at night, she dreamed of snow and claws, of Caleb's voice begging her to run. The dreams felt too real, like the valley was still inside her. Weeks later, Sarah returned to her family's farm in Ohio, a shadow of the woman she'd been. Henry and Lydia settled nearby, but they never spoke of the valley, their silence a wall between them. Eliza vanished, some saying she joined a convent, others that she wandered into the wilderness, chasing her demons. Sarah tried to rebuild her life, planting crops, tending the land, but the white shadow followed her, not in flesh, but in memory. She'd wake gasping, certain she'd heard its growl outside her window. Shadows moved in the corners of her room, too quick to catch. One evening, as winter settled over the farm, Sarah found something that stopped her cold. Carved into the barn door was a spiral, jagged and deep, just like the ones in the cave. Her heart pounded, her hands shaking as she traced the lines. It wasn't there yesterday. She grabbed a lantern, searching the snow around the barn, but found no tracks, no sign of anyone. "It's not real," she whispered, scrubbing the symbol away with a rag. But the fear stayed, heavy and cold, like the valley had never let her go. She started writing, filling journals with every detail: the cave, the altar, the white shadow's eyes. "Someone has to know," she told herself, her voice trembling. She sent letters to scholars, preachers, anyone who might listen, but they dismissed her as mad, a widow broken by grief. The journals piled up, her only defense against the nightmares. Once, she found a page she hadn't written, a single line in shaky script: "You cannot run." Sarah burned it, her hands shaking, but the words lingered. One night, a year after the valley, Sarah sat by her fire, the wind howling outside. The farm was quiet, the fields blanketed in snow. She was alone, her family long gone, her friends too scared to visit. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Then she felt it, a prickle on her neck, like eyes watching from the dark. Her breath caught, her hand reaching for the knife on the table. Slowly, she turned to the window. Red eyes stared back, glowing through the frost, set in a void of white fur. The white shadow was there, its massive form blending with the storm, its growl a low rumble that shook the walls. Sarah screamed, the knife slipping from her hand, but when she blinked, it was gone. The window was empty, the snow undisturbed. She sank to the floor, sobbing, the journals scattered around her. The valley was 1,000 miles away, but its curse had followed her. And deep down, Sarah knew it would never stop.